This is Antic, the Atari 8-Bit Podcast. I'm Kay Savitz. Dave Johnson programmed software for the little-known Interact Model 1 computer, and later worked as a programmer for Atari, where he created the game Lookahead, which was published by Atari Program Exchange. Lookahead is a fun little strategy board game that you can play against the computer or another human. We think, I'm 99% sure, that Dave programmed the Atari Personal Financial Management System, a slick-looking but buggy home finance package that Atari kept delaying, finally releasing a year late, then quickly discontinuing. Read Bill Lange's blog post, which is linked in the show notes, for the full story about that program. After Atari, Dave worked at Imagic, where he programmed the Atari 8-bit versions of the games Demon Attack and Atlantis. There, he also created the game Quick Step for the Atari 2600. This interview took place on October 12th, 2021.
I don't know why I was fascinated with computers the way I was. First of all, you got to look back at the time. We're talking 60s, 70s, and 80s, okay? And that's very different time. And computers were, they were very different. They were very different. I was just fascinated by them. I remember once in sixth grade, the teacher took me, just me and my dad, took me up to, I was in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and he took us up to Lansing, Michigan, because they had an actual computer there, an old IBM, I guess, was it a 360? That would be in the early 60s, mid 60s, just because he knew I was fascinated with the things. And okay, so then after high school, I went to a community college where I learned RPG on a Univax, because I was kind of taking a break before college, but I was taking some classes. I took logic and RPG on a Univax, with the cards, you sort the cards, don't drop them. Yeah. And then I went to college and I got a major in computer science on Fortran, and then Algol. Algol was new, and it means algorithmic languages. I worked as a janitor, at the University of Michigan, but I went to Eastern Michigan University. And as a janitor at night, I found it was like a teletype machine, kind of a terminal. And I knew how to log into the university, to the Eastern University computer. I would sit there sometimes doing homework and stuff, or just practicing programming on that computer. So somewhere in there, when I was working as a janitor, what was it called? Darn it, that first computer, that first kit. Remember? It was
the Altair?
Altair. There was an Altair, an article about an Altair, and I actually went to the credit union to borrow $400 to buy one. And I did that, borrowed it, paid it back out of my paycheck, and built an Altair computer. And all I could do with the thing was just play with the lights on the front. I was just so fascinated. So I knew 8-bit microprocessor, which was brand new back then. You got to know how new all this stuff was and how different it was. And I was just somehow, I don't know, genetically something fascinated with the logic of it. And so right after college, I got a contract job through a contractor to work at Ford Motor Company at their engine and electrical engineering lab. And I was working on microprocessors with right around their first, it was called EEC, Electronic Engine Control Project. And I remember I worked on an old PDP-11, and I was doing a simulation of their EEC it would monitor things like the oxygen sensors and all these things it had in the engine. Very simple, but a lot for the time to control an engine, to make it more efficient. And that was my first job. Did that for a while. I didn't like the big, giant corporate environment. Just didn't like it. So I saw an ad for a programmer at a new place called Interact in Ann Arbor. And in fact, it was right by where I had used to live in Ann Arbor. So I'd been driving to Detroit, which was it's not far. If you live in California, it's not far at all. But back then it was a big deal to drive from Ann Arbor to Detroit. It's hard to, especially in the winter. Oh my God, going out there in the car and it's like so cold out there, and you've got to sit there while the car warms up, and you're shivering, and you pour hot water on the windshield so that you can get the ice off. Okay, so I'm working at Ford, and they offered me a really good job, and I thought, this is horrible, this corporate environment. I just didn't want it. I'd been a hippie, Ann Arbor hippies, the whole thing, musician. I think me being a musician is related to having been into microprocessors somehow.
You think
and
so?
Math.
What do you play?
Back then I played bass and guitar, but a lot of people back then that were into computers were musicians, just some relationship. So, and remember, this is the 70s still. This is the late 70s, and microprocessors are new. The whole thing was new, and I just don't know now why I was so fascinated by it, but I was. And I got real good at it. I mean, it's just, you stay up all night doing this stuff always. It's just completely grabs you. So I saw this ad for Interact. I went and applied, and hardly anybody knew anything about microprocessors, so they hired me. But that was always my experience for a long time. If you were a computer programmer, you could get any job anywhere. And I'll get to that because that's Silicon Valley. That came later. Interact had the Atari computer, the Atari video game machine was out there getting popular. The Atari computer had the Interact computer. It's a little thing, had a keyboard on it and a tape drive on the right. And you would put in these tapes. I still hear that sound in my dreams at night sometimes, that sound. It's just like the sound of a modem, the old audio modems. So they had a keyboard, they had a tape machine, and they had these Intel emulators. I forget what they were called exactly, but they would plug into the microprocessor socket. And so you would control as if you were the microprocessor, but it had a little mini computer attached. And you programmed it in what was called CPM back then. It was a little bit of a structured language, a little bit. And but you also did a lot of machine language on it. You had to with those things back then. So
I'm looking at a picture of the Interact Model 1.
Yeah,
I'm not familiar with this machine. And 1978, company started in 1976 by Ken Lochner.
That's right.
Huh. Interesting. All right.
Yeah.
It's a new one to me.
That's right. That was, yeah. And did a lot of games, but I also wrote, I got a lot of it out of a magazine, but I wrote an integer basic to run on it. So it was a computer as well as video games, but nobody did anything with those things yet with computers. And later on, they got the Microsoft floating point basic for it. But that was one of the major educational points of my life came out of that in two ways. One way was going to work to stand on the trade show floor at the Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago. Okay. And this is in the 70s, okay? Late 70s, and this is in Chicago, and the whole thing was all consumer electronics. And then there was Atari was there, and then Interact had this little tiny booth downstairs across from a porn booth. Back then, they finally separated the porn out of the Consumer Electronics Show into its own section. But then there was this porn booth across from me, and next to us was a booth with the old kind of pinball machines. That was part of why I got into wanting to do video games, is I used to play a lot of pinball. Somehow that helped. And I wanted to get into pinball. And you remember the old game Space Wars? The original electronic video game had a vector screen and gravity, and you would be
yes, sure, yeah.
They were just little triangles going around a dot pretty much, and you'd shoot at each other and float around. That is a lot of what got me into wanting to do video games. that game and the fascination of being able to program those things. So we're at the Consumer Electronics Show. There's pinball games, and I still have that dream in my head at night, because all day long for days, da, 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 you know, somebody'd get a thing and it would go da, 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 and then the big screen of the porn thing across from us, and well, I won't describe what it was. Probably shouldn't. But here's the educational point, was that I had to try to describe to salespeople, to the buyers, what this thing was, okay? And I was a programmer. I was a total nerd engineer, total nerd speak, engineer speak math, okay? And really young. And I'm trying to explain to these guys are into sports, you know, and the whole salesman thing. And you're trying to explain to them, what is a computer? Why would someone want it, and all of that? And that's when I started to learn that there was this component of the public had to understand things about what you're doing if you're ever going to sell these things. And then the other one was that I was sent on a trip, with a traveling salesman who went around the state of Michigan to this chain electronics store back then called Highland Appliance. And I had to sit down with the salespeople, the floor salespeople in the show, and explain to them what was this thing and how to sell it, and loading the tapes as compared to the Atari, where you plugged a cartridge in. Okay, there was a big advantage Atari had. You plugged a cartridge in, you played the game. On this thing, you had to load the tape. Okay, so that comes in later, and I'll explain how later, in learning something about companies and marketing and the difference between marketing and engineering. So I wrote a lot of video games at that company, and I guess through some kind of attrition, and as the company started running out of money, I wound up being software manager at 20 something, you know. And there I was, and then my first real Silicon Valley style education came when I went over Christmas. My mother had moved to New York. I flew to New York, spent Christmas with her, and I came back at the beginning of January, and I went to work, and the doors were chained shut with a sign. And it said, if you worked here, you can pick your stuff up at so-and-so at this day. And all my stuff was in there, and they had gone out of business for tax reasons by the end of the year. And that's another part of a Silicon Valley education. So they were out of business. At the Consumer Electronics Show, I had gone and hung around at the Atari booth a lot to see what they were doing. I met a guy named Joe DeCure, who later became a big deal at Microsoft, in fact.
Sure.
And coincidentally married the sister of one of the programmers at Interact, unrelated to that relationship of Interact and Atari. He had just met her out in Oakland. Big coincidence. Okay, that doesn't matter.
Small world.
But I liked the guy. And so I applied, and I liked Atari, and I liked what they were doing. And this guy was like a very interesting, creative, smart guy. So I applied at Atari after Interact closed down. Well, no, that's not how it happened. I sent a job application to Atari, and then I flew out and I stayed with my aunt who lived in Palo Alto, and I interviewed at, God, I don't know, maybe 20 companies, and I got a job offer from every single company. And every day I would go to Atari and I would sit in their personnel office and just sit there and wait. And I'd say, I sent my resume to you guys. Can you, what's going on? What's going on? And they'd say, well, we can't, yeah, it's independent. You know, it already had been bought by Warner, and it was a big company with no communication and everything. Okay. So I just got all these job offers, and one of the job offers was to be software manager at Commodore, when they had the, you know, what was it called? The
Commodore 64.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it was a little before that. They had the big thing.
The PET. Commodore
God, you
PET.
know all this stuff. I forgot. You know more than I've forgotten. No, I've forgotten more than
I think about this stuff every day.
Wow. Okay.
So, yeah.
I try not to.
I get it.
One more thing. At Interact, I thought, these things should be used in education. They're great for kids. They'd be great for kids. And there was an educational research foundation right next to Ann Arbor in Ypsilanti, and it was called the High Scope Educational Research Foundation. And I went over there and I talked to them, showed them this computer, and they thought it was the most wonderful thing in the world. They had already done some stuff on the PET. And we did a project to write some educational software on this thing too. And I flew out to New York to, one of the, there's a magazine, Highlights. No, what's the name of the, doesn't matter. But I flew out there. It was a magazine for education for kids. And I flew out there and showed it to them and tried to get them excited about it. But it all turned out to be too late at the end there. But my title became Educational Products Manager too, before Software Manager. And that was my interest, was education, using these things and such. So, but then at the end of December, Interact collapsed. So there I was, waiting every day at Atari, saying, please get me an interview, come on. And then finally, my time there ended. I flew back to Ann Arbor, and I was so jet lagged. And I remember I'm sitting in my living room, I'm jet lagged, and I get this phone call. And it's it's the woman from Atari, from their personnel office, right? And she says, oh, they saw your resume, they want to fly you out right now. I just, and they met that night. They had a ticket waiting for me at the Detroit airport. So I drove back. I drove to Detroit airport. I got to California, San Jose airport, and I'm wearing this leather coat, right? This long, warm leather coat that I had, and a sweater, and remember, it's January now, and the weather, if you're in California, so the weather in Palo Alto had gotten quite warm, and there I was, carrying a suitcase, wearing this thing. The cab takes me, drops me off at Atari, and I'm just sweating. I got the thing off, but I'm still wearing a sweater, and nobody's there. Okay, I go into the personnel office. She calls over, nobody's there. They're all at a conference. They have left the building. All of them are at some kind of game design conference where they're all at, I think, Half Moon Bay, having a retreat. So there I am. And there was one guy, George, I forgot his name now, darn it. Anybody who knows Atari would remember him, because I think he was the manager at the time of the games. You got to remember that Atari is now this big Warner-owned corporation, and there's all these people doing marketing, sales, and there's a stand-up video game. What were they called? Damn it! You know what I mean?
Like a big arcade game.
The arcade
coin-op
division.
game.
And then over here in this building, there's the video games, right? And it was just like a little part of Atari. And so I go over. This guy has me come over. I'm starving. We go down into the cafeteria. We're in the cafeteria. Now, I'm from Michigan, okay? I had worked at Ford. I was a Michigan kind of guy, blue collar oriented. This guy had just finished a weekend at Est. If some of you might remember Est.
Yeah, the personal training, becoming a better person. Okay. Yeah.
I'm in the cafeteria. I'm sitting on one side eating a sandwich, and he's sitting there and he's like this. And he won't talk. He doesn't talk. And I'm sitting there eating. I'm trying to talk. Finally, I'm going, what? I'm learning about California real quick. California was very different from Michigan. Anyway, he said, I don't know why you flew out here. We saw your resume. You're hired. Just like that. So that's how I got started at Atari.
Nice. George who?
I don't remember.
Okay, he'll come to you.
People watching this will know who I mean.
Sure. All right, so that's how you got started. So you moved out, and then they moved you out, and what did you start doing? What was your job?
Well, Atari was in a transition. It was in a big transition at the time, and I just remember there was all this tension. There was a lot of tension because the corporate types had come in and they were trying to put their foot down on these wild, crazy Nolan Bushnell type people. And there was a lot of tension about it. I just remember that. I don't remember hardly any specifics, except they were very suspicious of me in the game division because I'd been hired by the suits types, and they didn't know. And I made a huge mistake. I showed up in a suit my first day. Yeah. So, and they had hired me to run an educational products thing, which had been abandoned by the time I got there. So the game side, the people were ready to punish me. All right. So, yeah. So I quickly organized S Day, and I started putting up signs all around that said, Wednesday is S Day. Wednesday is S Day. And S Day was everybody's going to wear suits and freak out the Warner management types when all the video game people show up in suits. And everybody showed up in suits.
Huh.
So I just remember that now. Now, how long has that been? How many years is that? 40 years ago.
40 years, yeah.
Everybody showed up in a suit.
Huh.
41 years. It was just so okay. So I completely transitioned over to the other side and just became just a programmer. Hired to run an educational products thing, but just a programmer.
Yeah.
So that was great. That's what I wanted.
Great.
Okay.
So what did you program?
Personal computer right away.
Okay.
They were coming out with the personal computer, and that's exactly what I wanted to do. That was just my life. I wanted to be in personal computers. I was on a mission to bring personal computing out there. So trying to remember, we had a lot of meetings, trying to, it was all meetings, just all the time meetings about I won't get into a lot of it. I'll tell you an interesting anecdote about it. So we're trying to do personal computer, but everything's being done in machine language, assembly. And assembly on an 8-bit computer back then, I think it was still 8080. The Interact was 8008, but I think, pretty sure that it was 8080 on the personal computer, the Atari 400.
6502.
Oh, God, that's right. 6502. That's right. I'm sorry.
All right.
That's right. Yeah, and the 6502 was, the instruction set was load, store, and there were some things called registers, and you could load and add what's in this register. And it was just a whole lot of load, store. And it was a lot of work, and then we had things called macros. You could refer to a macro that you'd already written that had a whole sequence of stuff, but it was all that. And the management of Atari, the marketing, it was so marketing oriented. They used to come into the video game side and they'd say, why don't you guys make the ball round? The ball was a little square thing, and it was defined as square. It was just square. It was a big square dot, and they wanted it to be round. And the tension between the marketing types, the business types, and the programming types was incredible at the time. And they hated the programming types because they depended on them so much, and they couldn't understand why these things had to be this way. And they were always saying, look, we need this by this date. And doing that stuff back then, when are you going to be done? Well, I'll be done when I'm done, because these problems would always come up. It was tremendously difficult. You had to get into these focused states way deep into the night. You had to get down and down and down into, and you're visualizing this, moving here and all of that. And if you get that concentration broken, you've got to try again, get started again. And things would go wrong, and it would take forever sometimes to figure these things out. And it got done when it got done. And sometimes it would be real fast. Sometimes it would be very grueling, long, slow, and just horrible on you trying to get this problem solved. And then the marketing people and the business people, they wanted product to take out there and pump out there and sell, and they hated us. And we hated them, of course. So there was this huge marketing tension. And then I'll tell you about one particular meeting that kind of exemplifies a lot of what was going on at Atari. There was a tools group, a systems group working on the computer system part. And I was, part of that somehow, although I wasn't officially in it. And we had a meeting with the president of the computer division at the time. His name was Roger Badisher. And I've never forgotten this meeting. We went in to try to explain to him that we needed some computer languages. We needed them to come up. There was a Pascal out on the Apple. The Apple had finally started coming out, and they had a Pascal by then, and these external hard drives and stuff. And so they were able to get some programming done. And we were trying to explain to him why we needed a programming language so we could get a lot of this stuff done quicker, rather than trying to just do these huge, long machine language things to try to get these programs going. And he got all, oh yeah, well, you guys don't really know what you're doing. And he leaned back. I remember how he leaned back and he got all visionary, and just like, oh God, I know so much more. And all visionary, and leaned back and said, "What? I don't want you guys doing any of this kind of stuff like that. What I want from you guys is I want you to come up with a recipe program that my grandmother can use, where she just says the recipes to the computer. And then she has all her recipes there for her. And then the computer tells her what she needs to buy and puts it on the screen for her. And then she can make her recipes." The gap there of his understanding of what a computer is and what a computer does and what's involved in something like that was just, it's like the old saying, well, you're not even wrong. You so much don't get it that, and that's how the meeting ended. And that's where we were left as programmers on the computer. We did have BASIC though. So they had me write a personal finance system, okay, a checkbook kind of a system for balancing your checkbook. And I had to do it in BASIC. Okay, this comprehensive checkbook system of you type your checks in, it balances it for you, you balance it, like Quicken is now, really. And a lot of it was like Quicken initially was. And I had to write that in BASIC, okay? So, and I remember I'm doing linked lists, I'm doing different kinds of specialized sorts, all kinds of stuff, and lookups and stuff, and all of it's in BASIC. And it was just the most amazing hodgepodge of things. And I actually got it done, got it working. There was a lot of conflict involved in that because they just didn't understand about what's involved in a program like that and such. So I got it done, I got it working. They tried to sell it immediately without testing it, I think. And so it flopped. Testing was another, okay. So that's a story about Atari, okay?
So was that personal finance management system, 1981?
I looked that up the other day, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's the one that was. That might have come out a little later. I think so. I kind of the PFMS is like embedded in my brain, but I can't guarantee that's the one I wrote. But it came out for a while and then was pulled. I remember that. It was horrible. I mean, it was good. It was real good, but trying to do that in BASIC, it's not going to work.
Right.
So, okay, so that's Atari. And in the meantime, competitors are showing up finally. Okay, the whole video game industry suddenly exploded. It was an intense time, okay? And there's newspaper articles, there's TV articles about the video games and everything. It became a very big thing. And the Activision came along. These guys left Atari, formed Activision, and started making actual money. Remember, Atari, they didn't have respect for the programmers, to say the least. I know you know the Prima Donna story, okay? I've got an Atari Prima Donna t-shirt from that. Right. Nice. An original Atari, where the president of the company talked about how these video game designers were prima donnas. They wanted stuff, I remember one guy, I won't say his name, and I remember him, but I think he did one of the major games. He was getting paid $17,000 at the time. Okay, and that was low Silicon Valley money. These were all people who just loved video games and the culture, and the challenge. And, we all knew each other. We all tried to top each other. It was a very big, interesting time. So they left. They started making money. And then Rob Fulop and Dennis Coble and some others left and started Imagic. And suddenly, Atari was interested in paying royalties, okay, and all of that. But somewhere in there, Nolan had left, Nolan Bushnell, a long time before, but he had a thing called the Incubator, a building he bought that had a bunch of startups in it. And one of the startups there was a robotics startup. He wanted to make robots. Yeah.
Axlon, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And a couple of the guys, I think it was the same tools guys actually, had left and gone there. And so I ended up going there and worked at Axlon. Yeah, that was great. Did you ever see the TV show Silicon Valley?
No, I haven't seen it.
On HBO, you got to see Silicon Valley. It nails it. There's a bunch of guys living in a house, an incubator, but it was one company. And this company there was just like that house, okay? The guy in charge of the company was that guy at that house, It wasn't run by Nolan. It was run by someone else, and it was low budget. We all went to the Consumer Electronics Show one year, and I remember we had to all go together and eat at the buffet, stuff like that. After Atari, that was lavishing money all around. But okay, so I worked at Axlon for a while, and that was interesting. The one product they did was the RAM disk.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like what we have now, SSD drives. You plug it into the RAM and it gave you 256 gig. No,
K.
K. Was it K, 256K?
Yes.
Oh God.
Isn't that ridiculous?
Yeah. And that's right. Oh God. Yeah, my original Altair had 2K, I think. No, 1K. 1K of memory. Yeah.
So you're still working on products for the Atari when you're at Axlon?
Yeah, then, but I did another one too. Nolan had bought somewhere at some auction, he had bought a whole bunch of these little devices that had little keyboards and a little tiny LCD screen. And what were they for? Oh, they were supposed to have been used to translate languages. I don't know the background of it, but he had bought this huge quantity of these things. And this had a weird processor. I forget the name of it. 4004. Anyway, one of those, the processor, the way it worked was you got 256 bytes. They called it a page. And when you programmed to the end of the page, you had to jump to another page. So it could only count to 256. So you had to do the programming and then jump. What he wanted to do was he had this thing hooked up with an acoustic coupler. That was looked a little bit like this. Okay. It looked like that, but you put these things over the phone.
Like the old modem couplers.
Yeah, you put it over the phone and then it would go, at the phone, and at the other end, there'd be another one. And you would actually type messages on it that would be sent over the phone, wherever you were. Okay. And think about that. This is 1980 or 81. Okay. So it was a little tiny email thing that was this big with a little tiny keyboard. It was like the BlackBerry kind of it, but in 81. So I programmed on that and got that processor. All right, so that's going on. And then I got a call. Somebody wanted me to come over and interview at Imagic. Somewhere in there, by the way, I did Johnson Software. You asked about that.
Right. Yeah. Your little company, I guess, that came up with various software for the Atari.
Yeah. And mostly educational. And
so was that like a side gig you did from home after work or when
Yeah, exactly. And I remember, I got your email about 10 minutes before this. So I went, Johnson Software. Oh my God. And somewhere in a box, I've got my old business cards from that. And the logo was, you've got a keyhole. And behind the keyhole, you see through it and you see this rainbow of colors and everything. And the logo was software is the key. Software gets you through this keyhole into this world of. So I just did a bunch of, and I tried to sell it to educational type of outlets. And Did okay, a little bit,
Yeah.
a little tiny bit.
You still have any of that software?
No. No. I only have one interesting piece of old software that I'll tell you about in a minute.
Okay. I'll just interject that the Atari community is trying to archive all of the software, and they're doing a pretty good job, but the Johnson software titles have been hard to find. Let's see. I want to mention the titles real quick. And do you have any stories or memories about, Associative Idea Generator and Great Circle Equation Program and Math Football? Sounds like
Math
real.
Football was the one that went out. Somehow it got on a defense contracting list for the schools at overseas bases, and I couldn't not sell that program. There's nothing I could do, but they get orders would just come in. I have to ship them long after it was useful. Nothing I could do to stop it. Once you get on some of those lists, But the associative idea generator was something I learned from a creative thinking class in high school. It would just pop up adverb and a noun, like thinking would pop up and machine would pop up. Okay, but you just had a random long list of each of these, and you'd stop on them and you'd try to come up with an idea. All right, so thinking piano, I don't know, and you stop and you try to think about it. And then we started using that at Atari and at Imagic, I think, a little bit of that kind of an idea. So I did a program that would generate these things. And the idea, the whole point is you just try to come up with an idea based on what you see there. And it really stimulates a lot of interesting kind of ideas, like a loud nickel. I don't know. See, I'm looking at the earphones and I have a nickel here. A loud nickel. What would that be? Okay. And you start imagining what a loud nickel would be, and then you see if you come up with things. That was that. Math Football was you had to solve, 3 + 3 = 6, and the football game would play and they'd move down the field. And that was for kids. Lookahead was a game I'd done at Interact, where you have a column and a row of numbers, and you would try to, there's 2 players. You try to get the highest score on this column, and then the opposing player then is confined to that row. And so you're trying to get the highest score that forces them to the lowest score. And you go around the thing that way until that was an interesting game. It was real popular behind the scenes at Atari.
Was it? Nice.
Yeah.
So that was based on a game that you had done at Interact, you said.
At Interact, yeah.
Interesting.
I had an Interact and a box of the programs, and I had it above a stairway in Santa Cruz at my house there. And then I moved over here to work at B and rented the house out. And by the time I got to look at it again, it had disappeared.
Oh.
I was trying to donate it to a museum, to the computing museum here. So I don't have that anymore.
So you worked at B as in BIOS?
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
I had a B box for a long time.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Yep.
I was
an evangelist there, but okay. So then I went to Imagic. Yeah.
Okay. But before we move to Imagic, let's talk about Lookahead. It's been one of my goals in this project, this multi-year project, is to talk to all the Atari Program Exchange authors, and I've done like 75%.
Did I put it out on that? I did.
You did. Yeah. That was yeah. So it was published by Atari Program Exchange. It was in the catalog and everything. So yeah, my question is, I want to know about that. Do you remember how well it sold? Did you get any royalties or not because you were an Atari employee? Or
not much, no.
Yeah,
hardly anything.
All right.
Sorry,
it's
not
right.
real memories of that. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. It was a fun game, and I enjoyed it. So
Silicon, by the way, this is an important thing. Back then, Silicon Valley was largely engineer oriented. And the Atari thing was an example of how Silicon Valley started to change with the bean counters and the marketers coming in. And there was a big deal tension back then all across, obviously the marketer types won, the bean counters won, the financial types won, but it was a big thing with Silicon Valley back then. You got to see the show Silicon Valley on HBO. It just nailed it. It just nailed the engineers. It nailed the billionaires. It nailed the venture capitalist culture. Just a perfect show.
So it sounds like, I mean, I've heard this before, but it's just, it sounds like there was a real stress and division between the marketing folks and the people actually making the software.
Yeah, there was. So Imagic was started by more engineering oriented people and controlled more by the engineers.
Yeah.
It became a big company with the engineers in a little lab and a lot of marketing and sales people. Okay. But it was established on respect for the engineering process. And it made a huge difference in how you felt working there. And obviously they started paying royalties at Atari too, after all of that. Like some friends of mine did quite well off of that. But in Imagic, it was a whole different kind of an environment and super creative. I do apologize to management for the months that we lost playing Adventure, but oh no, it wasn't Adventure. Was it called Crozair? Something. And we just all sat around playing this one game for a long time.
Oh, the text adventure?
I think so. But it was a little, where you had, it wasn't the original one. That was at Ford that I was playing that.
Uh-huh.
Oh, back at Ford. Okay.
Yeah.
So this adventure game's out and everybody's playing it. And the manager, it was all on a big PDP computer. I forget, PDP 12 or something. And the manager would look and he'd be able to do what's called a systat. And he'd look and he'd see this long list, adventure. And I was running a program called Engine. And he actually came to me and congratulated me and everything about how it was working. Well, I had done a core dump of Adventure and renamed it Engine. Okay, so no, it was.
We're talking Colossal Cave, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, twisty, windy, narrow passages. But no, it was some other game where you had hit points and stuff. I don't remember, but we just got entranced with it for a long time. All of us sitting around one lab. I remember. So anyway, yeah, that was an incredibly creative and competitive environment back then.
Yeah.
I was thrown into it. I was still just an engineer, and
at Imagic, we're talking Imagic now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then here I was supposed to do video games, right, which was great, but like I didn't have an artist. I didn't have this. Once I was asked why, when I did the Demon Attack for the Atari 400, 800. Why was it the same as on the Atari game? And when I was asked that question, I kind of remembered it wrong. I remembered it had to fit into a small cartridge. No, I remember now. It was because I didn't know better. I didn't have an artist to support. I was told, get this thing onto this machine. I put it on the machine. It looked the same, and they went and sold it. They didn't say, hey, make this better, make this reflect the computer, all of that. And I didn't know better at the time. And that's a regret I still have.
So they didn't ask you to use the capabilities of this machine to make the game better.
Nothing, and they shouldn't have released it.
Yeah.
And they should have said, no, do this. That's a side of Silicon Valley and the whole environment back then. Especially in video games, you're alone. You're doing this alone, really. You didn't really have teams doing things. Now I understand video games are like movies. You have entire production units and everything. Everything was single person, everything. And there was a kind of a macho competitiveness involved. And unfortunately for women, it was a macho competitiveness a lot. There were some amazing women doing some amazing work. Centipede, remember? And I forgot her name now, who was ended up at, did she do Rampage? No, I don't know. Who ended up at Activision? They were wonderful. They were smart, but women have never been respected in Silicon Valley and still aren't, I don't think. It's terrible. So I said a macho environment, I meant it. So Imagic was a great place. It was really something. Very competitive. God, I did a lot of things. My favorite was I did Injured Engine for the Commodore 64. And that came out of having worked at Ford. and all of that. And that was a visible insides of an engine, with the pistons going up and down and the fan going and everything, and something would go wrong with it, and you're supposed to figure out what's wrong with it and fix it. That was a very Michigan-oriented kind of a program, but I remember Commodore used it in some ads. I'm very proud of that one. And that one, I had an artist who worked with it, and I had a musician, Chuck Curry, who did a theme song for it. So, okay.
Nice. Let's see. You worked on Atlantis for the
Yeah, same deal, same as Demon Attack.
Yeah.
I cranked it out. I made it like the Atari 5600, and I didn't know better.
Mm-hmm. And were they working on, was this royalties at Imagic, or was it just strictly salary?
I don't remember getting royalties, but I'm sure it was, but it wasn't much. But I don't know. I actually don't know. I don't know. It wasn't until Quickstep that I got actual royalty check. So maybe not much. Maybe they didn't sell much or something. I don't know. But wasn't Quickstep, I got an actual royalty check. Quickstep is, and that's the software I'll tell you about. Okay. Quickstep is descending squares that a squirrel and a kangaroo have to leap on them, and the squirrel and the kangaroo, it'll change to either the squirrel's color or the kangaroo's color. And then the kangaroo will jump away, and if the squirrel jumps there, it becomes their color. And they go down the screen, and it counts how many of each go off the screen. But if you're on the square on the little platform, when it goes off the screen, you're sucked down and you're gone. And they would hop around and make noise, and it was real good. It was real fast. And you had to hop around and get it to go down. It was called Quickstep, and Montgomery Ward bought it to be their featured game for Christmas one year. And I got a hell of a check.
Nice. So this was for the 2600, I guess. Yeah. Right. I see. That's why I don't know about it.
To program that machine. Oh my God, that was incredible. That was, you had, I think you had, if I remember right, like you had a stack that was, I think it was either 512 or maybe 256 bytes. No, there was 256 bytes of RAM or 512.
I think it was 112, 128, 128.
Well, half of it had to be the stack. So the rest of it was all the RAM you had to do that game. And the way that you got things on the screen was you counted processor cycles. And then you saved the thing into a register that would then put a dot on the screen. And that was the most mind-blowing, intense kind of programming of, like, you had to count, I think was it 92 or 96? Anyway, and then there's, how many lines down the screen. And then you have a thing called V blank, while the beam that draws the screen goes back to the top. And that's when you do all your processing. So you get all your processing done, and then you draw the screen. Has this happened? Has this happened? It was just intense programming the 2600. And what I did in Quickstep was amazing, because I got 4 different colors across the screen at once. And nobody done that before. I found a way to do that.
Nice. There's a book called Racing the Beam about how to program the 2600.
Excellent. That's what it was.
Yeah.
God, that was intense. Not very many people could do that. It was very hard.
I can imagine. What other projects did you work at Imagic?
I did one on that nasty processor I told you about from the Odyssey. The Odyssey had that same processor where you had pages and had to jump, and I did that. Did the Commodore.
So, okay, you're humming along at Imagic, and you're programming games for all sorts of different systems and keeping different processors in your brain, and that
staying up all night.
Yeah.
We listened to a lot of, what would you call it back then, Devo and music like that. In the lab where we stood. For a while, we had a lab in Los Gatos. So it was separated from all these other people in a building. And I remember Mike Green wrote a video game that had that as its background kind of music. And that got some commentary in some of the magazines. Yeah. And then after that, I left. They kind of went under a lot of that in Silicon Valley.
Right.
We were going to go public. That was a big deal. And then I think it was the day before or the morning of that we were going to go public, Atari announced this huge loss. strategically announced a huge loss so that it would sabotage the public offering, and the public offering was withdrawn. And eventually they went out of business, kind of somehow ended up being part of Activision, I think. I worked for them for a little while too.
It's strange to me that Activision still exists and is a huge company, and yet Imagic, which was launched at the same time and under the same circumstances, more or less, just is gone.
Money management. Killing that public offering is probably what eventually killed Imagic, I'd say. So I left with Mike Green and started, it was then called Green Johnson, for the Macintosh. When we were at Imagic, a guy from Atari came over, or from Apple came over and demonstrated this thing that was going to come out called the Macintosh. And so me and him left. We wrote a program called Spellswell, a spelling checker, and started a company. Later on, I wound up buying him out and changed the name to Working Software. And that went on a while, and eventually it went bankrupt and took some time off. And then I ended up at B as an evangelist.
Nice. Here's
a story. Here's one anecdotal story for you.
Yeah.
So Atari was looking, no, I keep saying Atari. Apple was looking for a video game evangelist, okay, to go out. Now, remember, I had a background in video games, and I had just had a software company that did Macintosh software. And I knew everybody in the business of both businesses. And Apple was looking for somebody to go out and promote Apple as a company to write video games on. And obviously I was a high candidate for that job, and did most of the interviewing over the phone, I remember. And then I remember when I showed up, I had white hair by then. I was young, but I had white hair. And I showed up, and I'm in the lobby, and the guy says, I call him, and he says, welcome aboard. You know, I'm going to come up and start working there. And the elevator doors open, and his face sunk. And he sent me home. And I asked him later, what's going on? What happened to the job? He said, well, you looked tired. Yeah.
Huh.
You know what I'm saying, okay?
Yeah.
Old.
Yeah.
So I went, I was almost 40, I think. Silicon Valley is 35 and you're out, you know. So I ended up at B as an evangelist and kicked ass. Got a lot of companies involved and stuff. Yeah. So Silicon Valley, I have lived a Silicon Valley life here, and I have mixed feelings.
Yeah.
I also I live right near Facebook. Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. Oh yeah. I rent here. The housing prices, oh my God, because of Facebook.
Yeah. Wild. Let's see. All right. So going back to the Atari, I was curious, your development system, were you developing on an 800 itself?
Yeah. On the 800. We didn't have emulators.
Yeah. And we didn't talk a lot specifically.
The systems people did, of course. They had that kind of stuff to write system software. But we were using, the computer to write the software for the computer, which is good, usually, if management will let you have tools to write software with. Yeah.
I've heard a lot of, you're complaining about languages. A lot of the good stuff on the Ataris ended up being written in Forth. Did you ever dabble in the Forth language?
I dabbled in it, but no, that was not when I was there. And the only product I did at Atari, really, outside of Atari, I did a Lookahead inside, but was the personal finance thing.
Okay. Nice. Which we are not sure what it's called, but we can guess.
Which one it was, yeah. The unfortunate, written in BASIC, linked lists and sorts, and yeah.
What do you do these days?
Nothing much. After B went public at just as the .com thing went up and then it went way down. After that, I couldn't stomach Silicon Valley much anymore. After that, I was on the marketing side by then, and I didn't have the concentration to do software anymore. Weirdest thing, the concentration involved, and you lose it, you lose it. So I went into a whole other line of work for the years since then, which I won't get into now. And now I'm kind of retired.
And what do you do with your retirement time? I mean, you golfing, you watching TV?
Naps.
Naps?
I've got
I love
keyboard
naps.
here that I practice on. Trying to learn piano. I've always wanted to study the music theory behind it. I was good on guitar and stuff, but I never learned piano, and it makes so much sense out of everything. And reading a lot and a lot of exercise and stuff. There's various reasons I'm not working that I won't get into.
Okay. What haven't I asked you about the Atari and Imagic days that I should have?
The larger picture of the clash of the engineers and the people who just want to do really good work or just want to get the thing working, that picture versus the impact of financial whatever's, especially when something starts making money. I see the same thing happening in the movie industry, in the music industry. A lot of stuff comes out that's crap for money. Deadlines, all of that, versus the people who are doing it. The video game designers back then were in it for the art. Sure, the money became a consideration when you're at Atari and you look at the Atari would fly the private jet to Monterey to pick up lunch. Okay, for some of the executives. Atari would fly the lavishness of what was happening with the money as compared to the way the engineers who were generating the product was quite an education. That's right. I was going to get into one more thing. Then when I was at Atari, it happened again where the job of being on the trade show floor and explaining to salespeople as compared to what we're doing in the back. Remember, I had a company working software and all of that later. And the understanding of the customer and explaining things to the customer and writing clear manuals and all that kind of stuff was a big part of this divide. I mean, you've seen software designed by Linux engineers, and as compared to software that is written by designers who work with the customer. Okay, that's another of the two bigger picture tensions of Silicon Valley, and the video games, the marketing versus the art, the Silicon Valley financial side where getting the money in is what's important versus getting a good product out to people. It's a thing I've watched through my engineering side of my career and watched it evolve, and it has evolved in bad directions, I would say, mostly. Yeah, the best software, the good stuff is open source or it's done by people who love what they're doing. Okay, I'll start rambling now, so I'll stop. I was trying to get a bigger picture element into this whole thing.
I appreciate that. If you could send a message to the people who are still enjoying their Atari computers today, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Those games were designed by people who loved what they were doing, and they were doing it for you to have fun. And they weren't making very much money, and it wasn't about them making money. It was about designing stuff for you to enjoy. And maybe that's why they're still, so popular in some ways, that they have real gameplay. They don't depend on graphics, but they depend on making something that's fun to do. How's that?
Good answer. You said you only had one artifact from
I have one artifact from Quickstep, the game with the squirrel and the kangaroo.
Yeah.
Well, I did a special version for the salespeople, where the squirrel or the kangaroo comes up behind the squirrel It's obscene, but I still have that ROM.
Nice. Oh,
Yeah,
there, you might need to share that now. It's
yeah. For salespeople, Yeah, I hope it still works. I still got the ROM. I don't know if you plug it in, if anything will happen.
let's find out.
Sure,
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you, Dave.
sure.